Last year I released the first 4 parts of my Fallout 4 analysis, which total about 14 hours combined. Now I realize starting into such a series may be a bit daunting, so I decided to clip a few major segments out to be their own standalone videos. Specifically, each section on the 4 factions you can side with for the main story. This video covers the Minutemen. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and consider checking out the full analysis. The Minutemen are a complete non-entity that doesn't at all feel like a fully realized faction in any sense. Preston is the only member at first, and he immediately promotes you to be their leader. While I get they're on the brink of destruction, even when you do fully revive the Minutemen, it's populated almost entirely by nameless NPCs that don't do much. When the time comes to build the teleporter, Preston will straight up tell you that you cannot do it if you haven't done enough of his god-awful Radiant quest to save settlements yet. As if he wasn't enough of a fucking meme already, he actually forces you to do his shitty quests. Keep in mind, your character's entire motivation for getting into the Institute is to rescue their kidnapped child. He says this.
I need your help with these schematics.
Oh yeah? What are they for?
They get me inside the Institute.
The Institute? Why in the world would you want to mess around with them?
They kidnapped my baby.
Damn. That's some bad business. Even for them. I'd like to help, but you know my situation. I've got to deal with the immediate problems first. I haven't forgotten that you need my help. Remind me as soon as you found out what that settlement needed from the Minutemen.
As if your kidnapped child isn't an immediate issue. I absolutely refuse to accept that any decent person in this scenario, especially someone like Preston, who supposedly really cares about people, would tell a distraught parent, "You've got to wait to rescue your kidnapped child. I need you to help a random group of people you don't know first." This would be understandable if he was in fear of some kind of retaliation, but no such thing is ever mentioned. You're the fucking leader of the Minutemen. Why can't you tell Preston to go fuck himself? Why can't you do anything besides follow his orders? He promotes you to be the leader, but you have no actual decisions to make as the leader. You just do as he says, as if he's the leader anyways. You are the faction leader of the Minutemen, in name only. Even as you claim settlements on the map, it doesn't feel like the Minutemen ever become a substantial force. Most of these people are worthless dirt farmers, not soldiers. They're entirely useless entities to fill the world, and they seem unable to do anything for themselves. The game also seems to half expect you to arm and armor them all yourself, as they spawn without any armor, and they always have the lowest tier of guns available, the pipe weapons, which means if you want them to be better equipped, you have to collect armor and weapons off of every enemy you kill to do so. This just becomes exceedingly tedious, especially since your inventory is likely already full of your own equipment, as well as whatever random junk materials you're hoarding to dump into the next settlement building workstation you find. More on settlements as a whole later. Now the Minutemen obviously exist to be the yes man of this game, a group you can side with if all other paths get permanently closed. Credit to Bethesda where it's due, you can get permanently hated by, or effectively wipe out, the Brotherhood, the Institute, and the Railroad. That said, based on what little backstory the Minutemen have, there's no good reason why they should be filling the role of yes man, as they appear to be a group that has a vision and a set of morals and goals. This breaks even worse when you realize that with Nuka World installed, you could still complete the main story by siding with the Minutemen, even after you've gone full Raider. This whole scenario becomes even more ridiculous when Preston will refuse to be your companion, but will still follow orders because you're the general of the Minutemen, meaning he won't follow you around the world, but he'll still do things you tell him to as part of the faction, which just makes no sense at all. So there's a whole 8 quests in the Minutemen's part in the main story. The first intersects with the earlier part of the main story, where we save Preston and his crew from the Museum of Freedom. I don't know if I have much else to say on this quest. It can technically be skipped if you know what to do, and just do a beeline for the vault Nick is in, or else stumble upon him randomly, but you have to do it if you're doing the Minutemen path. The next quest is overly simplistic. So much so that I had initially mistaken this for a Radiant quest, but that just goes to show how absurdly simplistic the actual quests are, that they can even be confused with Radiant quests. The problem is the fact that this quest has no real substance to it, and the setup just comes across as an excuse to shoot some baddies. Just as a reminder, the original Fallout games and New Vegas designed most of their quests around some kind of conflict to be solved. While you could just shoot your way through most, if not all situations, they are often designed to be deeper than that. Here we get a quest to shoot our way through a dungeon to get an item. Essentially the most basic a quest can be. This is technically a side quest, but in my experience it came up while playing the Minutemen path. You also do get a Radiant quest, usually to go to Ten Pines Bluff, that is necessary for completion of this path. It's one Preston makes you do before building the teleporter. Following that is a quest where you retake the castle for the Minutemen. This is a straightforward quest that isn't particularly interesting in any way. You just show up and kill some Mirelurks and a Mirelurk Queen. This quest is more annoying than anything because you also have to go around the entire castle and deal with every nest of eggs which spawns a couple baby Mirelurks. Following that, you kinda have to be away from the castle for a few days so it can get cleaned up by nameless NPCs before getting the quest Old Guns. As it turns out, the castle has a whole armory that's locked behind a big metal door. To access this armory, you have to clear some rubble from a tunnel using the settlement building feature and go through the underground to reach it. Again, this is a rather straightforward quest, but I've actually got more to say here. If you can use the settlement building powers to remove the rubble, why can't you just remove the door? You can scrap entire collapsed houses or nuclear-powered cars among a whole bunch of other things, but you can't remove the door? I get the door is the whole reason this exists as a quest, but they didn't even do anything unique or interesting with this. You also use the settlement building feature to remove an obstacle, so it would realistically be very time-consuming, and not possible through normal gameplay without this feature. If you can use the settlement building feature to remove this obstacle, why can't you use it to remove this obstacle? You fight a sentry bot, dodge some landmines, and reach the other side. Also, you somehow find the perfectly preserved corpse of the former leader of the Minutemen down here. Fucking what? Now, I wasn't quite sure how long he had been there. The Mirelurks have obviously been in the castle for a while at this point. Possibly a few months, maybe even a year. But for the sake of accuracy in doing this analysis, I decided to be thorough here and look to see if I could find exactly when he died. The info I found, using the Fallout Wiki, refers to the Fallout 4 Vault Dweller Survival Guide, which is just a fancy title for the official walkthrough guide. From this book comes a snippet of information that says the castle was taken from the Mirelurks in 2240. For a point of reference, Fallout 4 takes place in 2287, meaning he likely died approximately 47 years before the events of the game. This is even listed on his page for the Fallout Wiki. Despite dying no less than 40 years prior to 2287, McGann shows no signs of decomposition. Wow. Even if this little tidbit of information happens to be wrong, since it's from a strategy guide, and technically not an official source, the guy's been dead for a very long time. But this is actually backed up by Ronnie Shaw herself, who says,
There's no point in getting all sentimental about something that happened 40 years ago.
This obviously doesn't break the game, but it is a testament to Bethesda's monumental laziness or incompetence. You make your way through the armory, and considering what Ronnie Shaw said about it, this armory is pretty lackluster. Apparently by schematics, she just meant one. Also, a couple of traps you can't move or use for some reason. It would have been a lot more interesting if, for example, there's actual unique equipment in here for modifying or crafting items, several unique blueprints instead of just one, and other goodies, or even equipment your settlers could use to improve their arms and armor on their own, or they could work on making something new. What we get is a single new workshop item, the artillery cannon. You build one and test it as part of the quest, and it seemed pretty worthless to me. I honestly didn't care about this item, and I never really used it, so I can't say much about it. The next quest is Inside Job, which intersects with the one from earlier, where you make your way inside the Institute. This entire quest is putting a holodisk into a computer, downloading data, and giving it to Sturges once you leave. I really can't say anything about this quest because there's nothing else to it. You just press a couple of buttons and talk to a character. What I do have an issue with here, however, is the fact that you can just download all the Institute's important data from this one terminal, and it all fits on a single holodisk. Amazing. Next is Form Ranks. In this quest, if you haven't gotten enough settlements yet, Preston tells you to go get some to build up the Minutemen's ranks. Basically, this fucking meme of a character tells you to go help another settlement several times. Following that is Defend the Castle, where the Institute decides for no reason to assault the castle in force in an attempt to wipe out the Minutemen because reasons. Strangely enough, this doesn't happen to the Brotherhood or the Railroad when you follow those paths. Sean must really care about his last surviving parent to try and kill them in this way. In all fairness, if you decline to join the Institute, your character will tell Preston that we're going to war with the Institute. But even then, it's not explained why. It's just something that happens. For some reason. Sean does say that by declining his offer to join the Institute, you'll be considered an enemy. But at that point, why even let you leave if he's just going to try and kill you later? One thing to point out here is how the coursers are no longer unstoppable Terminators. Remember, one courser took out an entire building full of gunners with exceptional ease. Yet during this quest, you and the Minutemen, the faction that's characterized entirely as being dirt farmers with guns, take out several coursers during the battle. There's one more quest for the main story, but I can't talk about it right now. I'll talk about it a bit at the end of this section after we go through the other factions. Finally, we've got the Minutemen side quests, and there's not a whole lot I could say here about the actual quests. Legitimately, the only quests they have are, you guessed it, saving settlements. Oh, and the quest I talked about in the previous video where Mama Murphy tells you the future. You can convince her to quit drugs and lose the sight, or you could get the single greatest reward offered in this game if you keep giving her drugs. She will eventually die. Out of the Fire ends up being one of the most interesting quests the Minutemen have as a whole, despite most of it being a dungeon with enemies in it for you to shoot. For some reason, these settlers decide to build their home 30 feet away from a massive raider base, and have ended up getting harassed by them as a result. Who could have guessed? The son had run off to go join them in order to protect his family. After mowing your way through the dungeon, you have the chance to save him from the gang leader. If you save him, he returns home, and there's a heartwarming scene where him and his father reconcile their issues. Also, the Forged are gone, until they respawn. Sanctuary is among the weakest and shallowest quests, but it is meant mostly as a tutorial for settlement building, in which you have to build beds, crops, and a water source. Troubled Waters is another quest about shoving bullets into things indiscriminately. Some robots run a greenhouse, and they need their water turned back on. The nearby water treatment plant is flooded, and you need to go clear it out and turn it back on. The outside has a bunch of super mutants, and the inside has a bunch of Mirelurk. Kill the enemies, press the buttons, complete the thing. You know, it says an awful lot about a faction when they have no real storyline, and the majority of their listed quests end in location name. Here's an idea. You know how Preston Garvey said the Minutemen were broken in Quincy? Why not have a questline dedicated to undoing the mistake that brought the Minutemen to the brink? It may not be related to the main story, sure, but would go a long way to add some character to the Minutemen and Preston Garvey himself that they desperately need. Maybe he could get some closure on the events that happened there. Why did the Gunners even want Quincy? What was the goal? Did the Gunners realize Preston needed a tragic backstory, and thus participated in the destruction of the one thing Preston was written to care about, the Minutemen? Or are we given this big story and nothing is done with it? Other characters in the game don't even seem to know or care that it happened, including a journalist, probably the one single person whose job it is to know such things. This gets even worse when you realize the massacre of Quincy was over a month before the start of the game. Piper's lie to get the door open is that a trader from Quincy with a month's worth of supplies wants in. No one noticed the lack of traders in over a month? Quincy is a big town, big enough to rival Bunker Hill or Goodneighbor, maybe even Diamond City. You're telling me no one noticed this town getting wiped off the map? The Gunners even went as far as to send off a group to try and track down Preston and the remaining survivors and wipe them out. Fucking why? What motivation was there for them to kill off a random group of survivors who abandoned the town they took over and don't pose a threat? Was it petty vengeance? Having a well-written questline around this could have been good for the game. Hell, with Preston's obsession with settlements on the map, you'd think Quincy would be a prime target to take back and restore. Instead of the way it's handled now, where you have to go save location name from a group of random baddies. Why not make the other settlements more interesting and unique? The Minutemen get to become a real force in the wasteland. You get to actively see their presence grow, patrolling the roads, getting into battles against various monsters, raiders, and synths that roam the land. New and interesting characters are introduced. The castle gets fully repaired, and a few settlements, probably the castle and Concord, which should also be a settlement, are established as major bases of Minutemen operations. They began running caravans, making alliances with Bunker Hill, Diamond City, and potentially other groups, and as the grand finale, the Minutemen launch a coordinated assault upon the Gunners in Quincy and take it back in a crushing victory. This could even lead into a war against the Gunners as a whole, and potentially wipe them out as a force in the wasteland, taking their basis of operation and resource, further strengthening the influence of the Minutemen. One of the Gunner groups is squatting in a vault, for Christ's sake, which would be an insanely valuable asset to the Minutemen in both terms of a resource as well as a settlement for people to live. It's safe and sheltered. It's not in some crap shack outside. The only presence I've seen of the Minutemen in the actual game is some groups of them fighting synths in random outdoor locations after you defeat the Institute, and random patrols of nameless NPCs. It's like the absolute bare minimum to show a faction exists, let alone is doing anything. Further, considering how you're the leader of the Minutemen, you should have the option to have them act as a sort of front to the other factions, should you complete the game with them instead. For example, if you side with the Institute, then you're the leader of both that and the Minutemen, so why not make it so the Minutemen are the force controlling the surface for the Institute from the shadows? Or alternatively, the Brotherhood could use them for information gathering, or as ground troops to help keep the local wildlife population in check, while the Brotherhood takes care of bigger threats. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please subscribe and check out the full analysis.